Hello and welcome to Teaching Liberty. I'm Stephanie Edmonds, and in this video, we're going to talk about 15-minute cities. Just another conspiracy theory or something that we should genuinely be worried about? Let's get into it. All right, I'm sure you've seen the headlines, 15-minute cities, the government's plan to control your life, or 15-minute cities, just another conspiracy theory. Well, as we do on this show, we are going to dive deeper than the headlines. We're going to provide some historical context, and I'm going to give you some actual examples that are happening right here in the United States and what it actually looks like. Because I think oftentimes there is a gap between these grand schemes that conspiracy theorists put out there and what it actually looks like on your local level. So go ahead, hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you aren't already, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos. Plus, on Saturday nights, I go live with a guest co-host around 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We react to some of the big headlines of the week and some of the ones that you might not have heard about. So definitely make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Help spread the good word of liberty far and wide. If you're on social media, follow me there, or for Teaching Liberty anytime, head over to teachingliberty.org. Check out the community section where you can become a paid subscriber, or head over to the shop and check out what we have there. Okay, so to talk about 15-minute cities, we have to go back to at least the civil rights era and the legislation that came out of that movement. Perhaps the most well-known of which is the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This is, of course, the law that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson during the riots that took place as a result of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. There were a number of bills in the previous decade that had paved the way. It all started with the Brown v. Board of Education case. Then there was the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1960, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So as you can see, these various pieces of civil rights legislation were meant to eliminate discrimination across all areas of life, to provide mechanisms of grievance for people, and then, of course, mechanisms of enforcement for the government if those grievances are proved to be true. So in this Civil Rights Act of 1968, Titles 8 and 9 are commonly known as the Fair Housing Act, which was meant as a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. While the Civil Rights Act of 1866, so this would have been post-Civil War, prohibited discrimination in housing, there were no federal enforcement provisions. The 1968 Act expanded on previous acts and prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and since 1974, sex. Since 1988, the act prohibits people with disabilities, families, and children, and so on. So you can see what we're getting at here. So you're probably thinking right about now, thanks for the history lesson. What does this have to do with 15-minute cities? And so to answer that question, we have to connect one more dot, and that takes place in 2015. There's a Supreme Court case. This is under the Obama administration, and it is going to leverage this 1968 law. So from Politico, we have SCOTUS upholds Obama legal tactic in fair housing cases. The Supreme Court handed the Obama administration a major advantage Thursday in its effort to stop housing discrimination in neighborhoods that continue to struggle with racial segregation and a lack of investment, setting the stage for an even greater expansion of fair housing enforcement. This means the government, the federal government, the state government, being allowed to use various tools, be they fines, be they legal action, be they put you in jail, take your property. Keep that in mind. In a surprise move, Justice Anthony Kennedy held with the liberal wing of the High Court that cases can proceed, even without proof of intentional bias, upholding the legal theory that it's enough to show that minorities are negatively affected. That approach has been the centerpiece of the Justice Department's aggressive pursuit of lenders who charge minorities more for mortgages than they charge white borrowers with similar credit histories. So it indeed seems to be a bit of a dubious case here. So there does seem to be definitely an issue that deserves to be looked at. How that should be done and what action should be taken, I don't know. But what we're going to do is we're going to go from this case that's about bank lending, and it's going to become even more broad. And the key here is even without proof of intentional bias. So it's not the intent, it's the outcome. Bolstered by this important ruling, the Department of Justice will continue to vigorously enforce the Fair Housing Act with every tool at its disposal, including challenges based on unfair and unacceptable discriminatory effects. Right? So this is outcome, the outcome of the situation. Activists pointed out that for possibly the first time, the Supreme Court addressed what Justice Anthony Kennedy called unconscious prejudice and disguised animus in the majority opinion he wrote. That kind of discrimination has proven hard for policymakers to solve, but still leads to tensions in places like Baltimore and Ferguson, Missouri. Because, right, think about where we are right now. This is going to be post-Michael Brown. It is very worrying when we're talking about unconscious prejudices and disguised animus. This just really opens the gates to many arbitrary accusations and really gives the government extraordinary powers to get into the business of private citizens. And I also think it's interesting that this article points out this kind of discrimination has proven hard for policymakers to solve because policymakers, lawmakers, are elected officials. They make laws. The courts, they make judgments based on those laws. They don't get to make laws themselves. So it does seem like there's some blurring of the lines of which branch is supposed to be doing what here. And the article does really go on to highlight just how big this is. Alan Jenkins, executive director of the civil rights group The Opportunity Agenda and former Justice Department official, said the ruling Thursday allows the government to address this more subtle bias. That's really a watershed moment, Jenkins said. DOJ has a lot of cases it could possibly bring. This is one of those confusing areas as well because a lot of these social justice type people, they don't like the use of law enforcement to go after and target people, and yet that's the exact mechanism that is often offered as the solution to solve problems. Give the government more power to go after people. Well, if they were the ones who were legally enforcing discrimination in the first place, why should we give them the tools to now undo what they did? Besides just not making sense intuitively, if we really look at the founding principles of this nation, the Constitution was meant to restrain the government. But let's go ahead and bring it back to this 2015 SCOTUS ruling. I think this is really important. So highlighting the expansiveness of the ruling could also affect how and where subsidies are distributed to develop affordable places to live. And this is exactly what we're going to get into. Diane Yantel, Vice President of Public Policy at the advocacy group Enterprise Community Partners, said the ruling will lead to affordable rental projects being maintained in older neighborhoods and distributed out to more affluent areas with sometimes better access to schools, transportation, and healthcare. And I think that this is a very important point to understand, especially when we're making that connection to 15-minute cities, that these cases, they are not happening by accident. They are happening because the government is taking concerted actions to make them happen, because there are well-funded organizations out there working around the clock to ensure that these cases are brought, to ensure that these specific arguments about unintended bias are being made. And again, we have to remember the context, 2015, 2016. We have the Michael Brown stuff going on. Again, like 1968, we have riots in the backdrop. So we have to be questioning all of these different social and political actions that are happening and how they may or may not be connected. Now, they may not be. They may just be social phenomenon, and this is how things naturally unfold. So again, there are a lot of forces out there, political and otherwise, working to ensure that this type of central planning at higher and higher levels of state and federal government takes place. Is it 15-minute cities? Maybe not, but it does give the federal government extraordinary powers. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a dissenting opinion, as did Justice Samuel Alito, whose opinion was joined by Thomas, Chief John Roberts, and Justice Antonin Scalia. By any measure, the court today makes a serious mistake, Alito wrote in his dissent, in which he said the majority opinion went too far by applying the Fair Housing Law. Alito said Congress intended to cover disparate treatment, not claims of disparate impact. You take a concept like disparate treatment where one might apply their reason to sort things out, and you expand it into something like disparate impact, and it creates all sorts of opportunity for other forces to come in and influence the situation, whether they be political or otherwise. And again, it is so important to remember that discrimination was legally enforced by the government. And those laws ran counter to the fundamental principles established in the Constitution. And so really, the government didn't have to do anything except get rid of the laws. And if there was something to be done, it certainly shouldn't be done by the same institution which was responsible for enforcing the discrimination in the first place, giving them these broad powers of enforcement over an increasingly arbitrary standard. And so fast forward once again to 2022 in Plano, Texas. This new multifamily affordable housing project gets approved in Northeast Plano. Let's check out the details. Developers for a new affordable housing project in Northeast Plano won their appeal, right? So not just got it rezoned. There was legal action that had to take place in order to get this land rezoned, which is allowing them to move ahead with an 80-unit complex. Versa Development is planning to build the 2-story Juniper Apartments on 6.8 acres at the corner of Los Rios Boulevard and Juniper Road. This is an opportunity to bring affordable housing to the city at no cost to the city, Manish Verma with Versa Development told Plano City Council at its September 20 meeting, which I definitely think is a comment that should be scrutinized. Perhaps it's not directly to the city of Plano and their taxpayers, but they are getting tax credits. So taxpayers at some level are going to be subsidizing this project. On August 15, the Plano Planning and Zoning Commission voted 8-0 against the request to rezone the land from single-family residential to multifamily residential, right? So August 15, this is where they say, nope, cannot do this project. So this is that initial denial, right? Because remember, they won on appeal. So August 15, they get denied. City staff recommended denial, stating the project did not align with several guiding policies in Plano's comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan is where a city looks at all of their land and says, okay, we have residential, we have commercial, we have this much affordable housing, here's the flooding area, all of these different types of things. And so the city policies recommend new multifamily complexes be built as part of mixed use or transit-oriented developments. So these are going to be places that are closer to downtown areas where you can access major roads, you can access the train or buses, things like that, which you are not going to get out in this area of Plano where they're saying that they want to build this 80-unit complex. Instead, this area near Oak Point Park Nature Preserve does not fit either of those development types according to city documents. The city's future land use map categorizes the area as a neighborhood, which puts a priority on single-family homes. The volume of traffic in the area was also a concern according to city documents. Again, there's no major roads in this area where they are suggesting it. There's also traffic patterns that could potentially be dangerous if there were an increase in cars in that area. So there's a lot of opposition to rezoning this area. The request is well outside the character of the surrounding environment, city staff wrote in a review of the project. Nearby neighbors also overwhelmingly oppose the project. And so as we saw above, the Planning and Zoning Committee voted it down unanimously, 8-0. And yet, on August 18, developers filed a formal appeal to Planning and Zoning Commission's denial. And what this article doesn't state is that they are also working with a community activist organization. So again, there are a lot of politics and other forces at play here that aren't necessarily brought into context in these basic news articles, but are really important for understanding this story. So following this August 18 appeal on September 20th, the Plano City Council votes 8-0 to overturn the commission's vote, so that Planning and Zoning Commission gets overturned, and they approve the rezoning request, though they do make several stipulations. In part 2 of the video, I play this clip where Councilmember Shelby Williams talks about how it's just not a great place for this project. It has nothing to do with whether it's affordable housing, low-income housing, or anything like that. But he said the project has been positioned in such a way that the city could face a protracted legal battle if it were denied. So just to be clear, what's happening here is this developer, let's call him by his name, Manish Verma, is using the Fair Housing Act to weaponize the federal government against local community members in Plano, Texas. So are these 15-minute cities? Is this laying the legal framework to march in total government control over our lives? I don't know. But I do know that spending our time fighting over whether this is or isn't a conspiracy theory is a distraction from what is actually happening on the ground in our communities. And that is that the federal government, the entity which is responsible for legally enforcing discrimination, now wants to have greater powers to supposedly, under the guise of anti-discrimination, have more power. And that is something that individual citizens of all races, religions, creeds, colors, political backgrounds should be very skeptical of. Often in reading articles and doing this type of analysis, even when we're looking at the specific story of Plano, Texas that is happening right now, we can still forget how these stories really impact real people. So be sure to check out part 2 of this video where I interview Lovepreet and Ismail of Plano, Texas. Lovepreet actually lives directly next to this property in which this developer is coming in and weaponizing the government against these local community members. So Lovepreet is taking a stand. Ismail is right by his side trying to organize and rally the community members. They've raised money, they filed a lawsuit, and they are currently in the middle of legal action. We have to get more people talking about this because this isn't just one case in Plano, Texas. As we've seen from going through the history, these things are being engineered from the highest levels by the federal government and by well-funded nonprofits. This is happening, maybe not in your city or your town yet, but it is definitely happening on the state level, and it is definitely happening somewhere near you. So get out there, do the research, talk to your neighbors, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video with your friends. We have to get the word out because when we think free, we live free.
Come on.